Welcome to episode 3. Before we installed the fire, the first thing was to move one of the LED lights on the roof. It was oddly on the wrong beam and not symmetrical with the other lights anyway, so we already intended to move it. It probably wouldn't have been too close to the flue of the chimney, according to regs, but it needed moving anyway. It turned out to be a bit of a job because we didn't have a ladder long enough, so I ended up having to do this slightly sketchy stack of pallets with a ladder on top. These lights are really nice. They have these very simple clips to clip them to the beams, so actually moving it wasn't too bad. It was more getting up there was the problem. I don't enjoy working at heights whatsoever. The roof of this building is asbestos, so I didn't want to cut the hole in the roof, of course, for obvious reasons. Luckily the landlord said he had someone that could do it, so my brother and I just taped up this sheet to make sure none of the dust got inside and left. Marked it up and left, let them do it. Here you can see me kind of unboxing all of the Flue pieces I got from Knights. Really beautifully made stuff, really good system they've got. They kind of click together really simply. This is the bit that goes on top. It fits really tightly around the flue, which kind of makes a waterproof seal. It's the flashing that goes around just onto the corrugated sheets. I really wasn't quite sure on the best order of operations for installing the stove, whether it was kind of installing the short piece that goes on top of the stove and then the two lengths that go up to the roof and then the one on top, or kind of one section at a time. We ended up fitting the first 3 sections, so that's half a metre of single walled flue and then 2 metres of double walled insulated flue. You see me very clumsily trying to get it into the hole in the roof. This actually worked really well. It happens to be that the join above the roof is just enough that we can kind of rest the whole thing in place on top of the stove and it's not going anywhere, so I could fit the flashing on top. Again, I really didn't enjoy being on the roof. Kind of, even though it's not a high roof, the heights I don't deal well with it. It's also a very cold day, so kind of any fiddly little bits with fingertips weren't so easy. Once we had the flashing on top, the flue kind of sat in the hole quite happily in the roof. So I could take out the first half-metre section and use this fire cement to fix it in the top of the stove, in the stove port, and then we use the fire cement again on the adapter that goes between the single wall and the double wall flue. I've never installed a wood stove before. All I've done is watch a lot of videos like this one on YouTube and read the regulation document to see what's safe to do and what's not safe to do. This stove will be signed off by a HETAS engineer once he's all done. You can see levelling the flue, which is obviously quite important. Unfortunately, the corner of the breeze blocks you can see behind it isn't quite plumb, which meant the chimney didn't look plumb either. Doesn't matter, probably no one's going to notice except for me, but just a little thing. It was actually the wrong time to level the flue, I noticed in hindsight, because I then had to go back on the roof and apply the the weatherproof sealant under the flashing, which kind of conforms to the corrugations of the roof. And obviously while doing that, I move the flue a little bit and knock it out of plumb. So I did have to go back and re-level it afterwards. It's fortunate to have my brother with me all day this day. Something I wouldn't want to do on my own, I'm not sure would be sensible. You can see, quite simple really, a couple of fiddly bits, but it really just clicks together. Getting it watertight is the important thing, and making sure it's all nice and plumb, but it kind of goes together like Meccano. Ended up being on the roof for about 2 hours, and it started snowing and obviously got dark, and wasn't quite enjoying it by the end of it, but really satisfying thing to get in. I had 2.5 cubes of firewood delivered, although I'm obviously going to be able to burn all my scraps, which is great. Probably not going to have enough to heat the workshop over winter, so for now I just had a bit of firewood delivered. This is Western Red Cedar, which is a softwood, so not a fantastic firewood, but it's a local timber merchant, and it's all they had at the moment. It's seasoned, it is firewood, just burns a little bit quickly, but I think it'll get me by for now. Maybe one of the most satisfying things I've done is kind of a day of hard work, getting the stove in after building the hearth and all of that work, and at the end of the day being able to light the fire. That's kind of such a satisfying conclusion to the day. Really pleased with this stove. Stove's about 50 years old, I think, but he's solid, there's no cracks in it, and it just seems to work. It's a 9 kilowatt stove, which should be enough to heat this space, although I'm aware there's a lot of air gaps and the roof is not insulated. So I think eventually I'm going to look into insulating the roof, but that's down the line a little bit. So next job, now the fire was in, I could lay the floor. Had all the ply delivered from Selco again. They're really nice, kind of 8 ply, 18 mil full sheets. They're heavy, but are going to provide a nice solid floor. I didn't want any bounce in it. I didn't want it to kind of feel like a shed floor. So I thought I may need to anchor some of the studs down to the concrete. Although I decided to do this afterwards because I didn't want to make too many holes in the damp-proof membrane if I could avoid it. So I decided to lay all the sheets and then feel if there was any bounces, and I can go right through the sheets, through the stud, into the concrete and anchor if I need to, which will just solidify everything a little bit. Luckily, I had Sam and Dan to come and help me this evening, so I could get all the sheets down. It wasn't quite as quick as I imagined. I imagined it being quite a fast process because a lot of them are full sheets and didn't need cutting. But obviously the room wasn't quite square and there was a few little errors. On the whole, all the sheets, the edge of the sheets landed halfway between the stud or where I wanted it to lay. But there was just a few fiddly bits, but it went down. It didn't really cause us too much hassle. Of course, something I didn't think about was laying studs and then a floor on top. I've raised the floor quite a bit and the door didn't open, so I had to take 20mm off the bottom of the door, but that wasn't too bad. Fortunately, someone lent me their Festool track saw, which was fantastic. and I've not really used a track saw before, and I'm not really a fan of circular saws, but I mean, power tools in general I'm not overly experienced with, but I actually not sure how I would have done this job without that track saw. It's brilliant. It meant taking off small bit edges of the ply, all the bottom of the door off, really easy. I needed to mark the power cables on the top of the floor. I thought about just doing a pencil line or a marker or something like that, which I've done before, but I wanted it to be very obvious. I've screwed into a power cable before and blew all the power in the workshop, so I wanted it to be nice and clear. So I thought I'd make a bit of a kind of highlight it a little bit, make it a feature. So I masked off a nice line and decided to just paint it red. One mistake with this is I did it about the width of normal masking tape, about 25mm wide. So once I removed all of my masking tape, it did just look like red electrical tape that I'd laid and not painted. So I think I would have done it thinner or thicker, and it would have looked a bit less standard. The most challenging bit of the floor, as you can imagine, was laying the sheets up to the quarter round half. For the fire, I kind of pondered how to mark that circle, because it wasn't a perfect circle. By the time we'd mortared those bricks down, it no longer was an arc or a segment of a circle. So I knew I had to mark it exactly from the bricks rather than kind of drawing a perfect circle. So I could cut an angle off the sheet, lay it in place, and mark that line on the bricks. You'll see it a little bit more clearly on the second sheet. It's the other thing that made it a challenge. The hearth spans 2 sheet widths, which meant it wasn't just a case of cutting the curve in one sheet, but 2 sheets had to match, which made it a little more challenging, but it did actually sit in first time, and I'm really pleased with it. It's neat. Moving these sheets around on my own is horrible, and I do not recommend it. So it was a similar method for the second sheet. I didn't have to cut the angle because it was a full length sheet to the wall, almost. So you can see I marked the straight line of the sheet onto the bricks, and then a series of kind of marker points where I could take measurements. These marks were made on the sheet as well as on the bricks. I could then bring the sheet away from the bricks and measure from each point to the edge of the curve, transfer that onto my sheet, which gave me marks along the arc. I could then kind of approximate and sketch the curve, which I knew was going to be good enough for this. I could have taken more measurements and got a more accurate kind of copy of the curve, but I don't think it's that important. Eventually I think I will put some sort of edge on the ply to neaten up the hearth, because obviously the jigsaw doesn't do a brilliant job of leaving a clean surface, but I think it's good enough for now. I do have to keep telling myself at the moment that this is a workshop, although I want to make it a really nice and positive studio space, which is kind of something we talked about in, I think, episode 8 of this Crafted World podcast, a podcast my friend and Shane do. We talked about working in a positive space and how much difference that can make to your enjoyment of the work and the quality of the work you do. And I found that to be really important for myself. My workshop at home was small and ended up not feeling like an overly positive space to be working. So I almost dreaded it quite often, getting through those monotonous tasks. So if I can make this space a positive area where I want to be and I want to work, then I'm just going to enjoy every day I am here, as well as obviously that transfers to when this becomes a school. When the students are here, I don't want it to seem like work for a student. I want them to be excited and have a really positive experience. So all the little things like laying the curved hearth and all of that, although it seems a little overkill for a woodworking workshop, I think it's important to me to have it as a lovely space to be. In the same regard, here's varnishing the floor. I didn't have to varnish the floor, but I've laid a plywood floor in my other workshop and it's great, but quite quickly it goes brown and it goes grey and spills soak into it and it gets filthy, which is fine, but I'd like this space to remain bright and clean, so a couple of coats of Osmo oil and it'll neaten it all up. So next time we're going to paint a feature wall with the help of Freya and do loads of other things, I imagine. Thanks so much for watching.